Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Regional Housing and Growth Issues Partnership meeting. This is a full meeting of the advisory group, and we are recording this. So we appreciate you all being here, and we're going to jump right into our agenda. I'm Kiki Miller. I'm a council member in Coeur d'Alene, and a few announcements here as I lead us through this is there have been some presentations made regarding what the Regional Housing and Growth Issues Partnership is doing and what progress we've made to date. I have done some for individual civic group organizations, and we also had 4 of us do a presentation to the Coeur d'Alene Ignite Board on a very brief presentation on some of the steps and gave them a chance to answer some questions. So if there are any organizations that would like to have a presentation by one or a few of us, please just shoot me an email or give me a shout, let me know, and we'll see what we can do. It's really been our goal to try to keep what we're doing transparent and out in the public and keep everyone informed and engaged. There's been a couple of additions. The roster is going to be updated with a few people who've been added to the advisory group. So that should happen sometime this next week. And we are still looking for a place that we can house separately an online presence for the Regional Housing and Growth Issues Partnership. But as you all know, this isn't a funded entity and we don't have any single administrative person that can manage that. So we are in the process once we move forward to hopefully taking everything we've garnered and putting it in one location. If I want to do a brief assessment, I know I'm still gathering some information that I'm a day late on in forwarding to the University of Idaho, but I have gathered it. We'll get that email out to them tomorrow to add some more information regarding vacancies and employment in Kootenai County, and that will come into their housing assessment. But Maggie, if you're here, maybe you could give us a brief update on how things are going there and what we should expect.
Sure. Thanks, Kiki. Hi, everybody. So we meet weekly with the U of I team. I think that we're probably at least a month out from seeing a final report. We hope within 2 weeks that we'll see a draft report, but they've got the structure of the report pretty much organized. It'll provide regional perspectives, of course. It'll look nationally at the state of Idaho, as well as then drill down specifically into Kootenai County and Shoshone County as well. They're going to cover a lot of housing drivers, which include all the constraints, both from a building standpoint, as well as a supply standpoint and labor standpoint. And then they'll speak to the economic consequences in our area with our loss of really employees who can no longer afford to live here. So I think that will be a really important part of this report as well. So I think it's progressing. It was an ambitious deadline to have it be October 31st to begin with. And so we have known now and I've shared this with you already, that we're pretty sure it's going to go beyond October 31st. We know that for sure now, but we'll have it. And I think it's going to be a great tool for all of us. Still feeling very good about it.
Good. Thank you, Maggie. Appreciate all your hard work on that and the team at University of Idaho. I know this is one of the most detailed and in-depth real-time pieces of data that we're going to be able to use as a community. So it's important work, and I really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, and I've said this before, but I just will add this. I mean, the power that's in this Regional Housing and Growth Issues Partnership that's come from the community having such a great awareness and having all of the effort and energy that's being invested into this has really been a conduit, I think, to help the U of I team in this work that they're doing. So it's been really great. I think we're quite a unique area with the elevated awareness and work that's going on. So I really tip my hat to this group, the working group and advisory group.
Great. Thank you. And then Hillary was Jeff Bowler. Is he here?
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Great. If we can move to Jeff, then he would give us, Jeff is chairing up our schools subcommittee. As some of you remember, as we did our survey to all of our advisory group members, the one of the number two items that came in was to address our impact on schools. And so that subcommittee has been moving forward. So Jeff, feel free to give us an update. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kiki.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be here. I think my biggest update is we had a meeting with the Development Committee of the North Idaho Building Contractors Association. They have, it's pretty recently they formed a committee just to talk about some of their challenges and struggles. And they invited us to their meeting at the NIBCA, and 4 of us were able to go sit and have a conversation with them and really share our story, talk a little bit about some of the struggles that we face as schools and our concerns with building moving forward. And started to talk about what would it look like if they were to participate in that, and we could find a way of partnership, whether that be impact fees or even just something on a local level. And they seem very agreeable to having conversation about that. So we were encouraged by that. Our next steps with that are to come back to them with some ideas of what that might look like. And so I think for a first meeting, that was a great first step, and would love to continue that conversation and those partnerships. So that's really the work our committee's been doing. And then Kiki, I was asked to answer some questions. Do you want me to go into those now, or maybe?
If you're ready, we did review some of those. A couple of our, I think an advisory group member or 2 had a couple of questions about specifics on schools, and we touched base with you earlier to see if you were ready to answer those. And now would be a great time since we're on that subject. So thanks. Okay, great. Yeah, I'd be happy to jump into that. And I think to the point Maggie said, I think one of the things this growth group is doing is really igniting the community conversation. And I think as part of that, I've been asked some questions very specifically on some impacts of the Coeur d'Alene School District. And so I was reaching out through that. I was asked 8 very specific questions that I was asked if I could go over today on behalf of the Coeur d'Alene School District. So let me just review those and go over those. So the first question, and really I think all of these relate to what's our story and what are the challenges that we face as school districts. And I think while these are kind of my story with the Coeur d'Alene School District, I think this impacts Post Falls and Lakeland just the same as I'm answering these questions. So the first question was, what's the current capacity condition of the schools in the district? How many schools are presently at, close, or over capacity of what the buildings were designed for? And this is kind of a twofold question, because I look at this in kind of a pre-COVID and where we currently are, because all of the school districts have lost some numbers due to loss of enrollment through COVID. But so pre-COVID, like our elementary schools, we have 11, 7 of them were at or over capacity pre-COVID. Right now we have 3 that are over capacity or at capacity right now. Our bigger concerns are middle school. I have 1 middle school that is just completely bursting at the seams. It's really a couple hundred students over capacity. We're managing that in the use of portables, so which is a way we can handle a little bit of additional capacity there. And then currently both my high schools are over capacity as well. The next question is, what do you anticipate the projected growth will require of the school district to keep up with this growth? The answer to that is continue to secure land for future school sites. Immediately, we would need 1 middle school. We need to address the high school capacity. While that may not be a full comprehensive high school, we would need to definitely address that capacity one way or another. And while we thought we were going to have an immediate need for an elementary school, we still believe we will, but we believe that's going to push out a few years and will be slightly lower on our priority for that. The third question was, how many new elementary, middle, and high schools will the district need? Oh, that's really the same question. What, if done today, would be the estimate cost of the needed elementary, middle, and high schools? An elementary school would typically cost $16 to $20 million, middle school $27 to $30 million, and then a high school would be determined on a needs. But if we were looking at a full comprehensive high school, you're probably looking upwards of $70 million for a high school, be the going rate. Roughly about $350 a square foot is the going rate of school construction right now. What do you think that the voters, if requested today, would pass the required bonds? I want to start that question by saying Idaho has one of the most stringent requirements of any state in the union when it comes to passing bonds. They require a 66 2/3 supermajority. And I would also note that the state of Idaho does not fund any towards the construction of schools. So all of that construction of schools falls on the local taxpayer. And to answer that question, do I think a bond would pass today? I would liken that to the levy that we just ran in March of 2021. And that was operational levy, which only requires a 50% majority to pass. The Coeur d'Alene School District passed with 59%. Post Falls did not pass, and Lakeland barely passed. And so
Given that answer with bonds needing 66 2/3, I'd have to say no, I don't think they would pass today. And it's something we may need to run a couple of times to see where the community's at. And so that leads to the next question: what is the alternative if the voters do not pass bonds? And as school districts, we'll continue to do the best we can to serve our students with the resources that we have available. And we've worked, in the Coeur d'Alene School District, we've worked hard to eliminate forced transfers, but we might have to look at some alternatives to go back to some of those hard challenges. Question 7 was, has double shifting been discussed already? Double shifting is where you basically run some kids in the morning and then you run some kids in the afternoon, evening. So you're basically running school from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. at night. And in the Coeur d'Alene School District, we haven't specifically talked about that. That was a system that was used in the late 80s, early 90s. For us, that would be really a last ditch resort, but it's certainly something that we could consider if we needed to. And then the final question that I was asked to address is, how will the district manage if the needed facilities are not built? And my response would be, we need to continue to assess alternatives. It could include busing students across town to schools that might have capacity room. Double shifting certainly could be a possibility. And while it's our stated goal to eliminate the use of portables, we could consider adding additional portables across the district. So a lot of challenges facing us in the years and days ahead.
Great. That was a lot of good information. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Did you have anything else on the subcommittee you wanted to add?
No, I don't. I know that was a lot of information. So if people have specific questions, I'm happy to reach out and dig into this at an individual level as well.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. The next thing I wanted to let everyone know is a report on the open space subcommittee. I'll tell you that we had a number of people who were invited. We had a Zoom meeting last 2 weeks ago. There wasn't a huge amount of participation at that meeting. We did go through what needed to happen. It was a very brief agenda. So I think there were 17 or 18 entities and people invited, and we had 8 people show up. At this time, there is a draft white paper that I think you all may have seen. It is now, it's been sent out before. We are still awaiting 2 components on agricultural preservation techniques that are going to be added to that. 2 new people have volunteered to put that information together and add that to the white paper. Once that's done, the extensive counties white paper plan and that plan will be posted to the KMPO website. But the status of this committee right now is there is no leadership who has stepped up to run this or move it forward. So our job as the Regional Housing and Growth Issues Partnership is to be a resource and provide the information and the pathways to get these things done. But there is not an active implementation committee formed. There was a great article in the Coeur d'Alene Press on October 22nd on the top of the local section. If you want a copy of that or you hadn't seen it, shoot me an email and I'll get you that information. It kind of wrapped up where we were with the open space conversation and where that's going to move forward. So I will say that that is a meeting I would happy if there is groups of people who want to come together and address this issue again. I'll be happy to facilitate another subcommittee meeting, but at this time, that isn't one that there appears to be interest out of this group to create and move forward. So that's the final report on that one. I just wanted to assure all of you that we did spend months addressing the #1 priority item that came out of that poll, and that was to collaborate on preservation on the prairie. And so there's an extensive amount of information on the KMPO site about the results of all that, and that's where we are today. So having said that, we will move into the rest of our agenda, which is now we are at the local worker housing solutions, education, and discussion. What I want to open this with is, as you all know, you received this. We had discussion and you received a draft of a survey poll that we were going to send out to you to share with all of your members, constituents, networks. But what we realized as we've come through this huge animal, we need to be able to give you more information and more education and have an opportunity to ask questions before you send that poll out. So we're going to start on doing that today. That's going to be the balance of our meeting. We are going to have a Q&A time at the end, and I believe Sean Holm is on so he can answer questions in the chat box as we go. But we would, Hillary will be able to unmute someone if you wanted to ask a question, and we will do our best to try to get that put together at the end of this meeting. So I'll kind of instruct us to raise hands at the end if we have enough time to get through a little Q&A. So the first thing I wanted to do is have Bob from the City of Post Falls. One of the things you know that we've all been working on is this housing toolkit. These are all items that are, regardless of how the housing management structure conversation comes together and where we go with this, these are all items that are an ongoing basis being worked on so that they can be utilized by any of the jurisdictions to address policy with their decision makers. And we have a consistent set of information being put forward that can address some of our housing and growth issues. So that toolkit is still being worked on. It's being expanded and embedded. And Bob, do you want to just touch base on a couple of those items that we've talked about so it kind of refreshes everybody's mind about what that is?
Sure, absolutely. So some of the issues that are in the toolkit that we're looking at, we're working on. I mean, it's an extensive list of items that are on there, but just in general, we've been kind of looking at some potential for ordinances related to the short-term rentals like Airbnb and VRBO. Coeur d'Alene's been working on theirs. Post Falls will begin to work on theirs in this coming year. There were items related to limited equity co-ops. Whether what's the feasibility or the types of the benefits on that. That kind of involves the ability for others to buy into these co-ops, these housing co-ops with limited shares for various rates. We talked about membership developments. I think that some of that was related to, is there a possibility for entities or organizations to provide housing for their employees, or provide it as an opportunity for their employees to live in these as they come into the area, because that's been one of the biggest struggles, is that when the local businesses and organizations are looking to hire for people outside the area, one of the biggest struggles they have is to be able to find housing when they come here. I know that we are having that issue with bringing on employees with the city. We're looking at ideas in terms of private development support. Sandpoint has a great example up there where they had a developer come in and they had basically determined to sell those homes to locals only. I believe it was the primary piece on that at what they had deemed an affordable rate. But again, that was a private development, that was a private decision, but that is routes that people can go. There's no single easy answer to this problem, and the issues are here to stay, it seems. So, we're going to continue to develop this housing toolkit, continue to add information to it, continue to break it down a little further as we go. All of this takes time, and obviously a kind of a concerted effort from everyone involved as possible. From a city perspective, we will look to try and find ways to include housing framework, these housing toolkit policies into our comprehensive plans in the future as we address those, so that we can kind of have them included as part of our goals and part of our policies that we want to see moving forward. So
great, thank you. Great, thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. And we'll keep you all posted as we move through some of these and get closer to finality on some. So the next thing we had on our agenda was Al Wolf was going to talk about one of the Chodo examples we'd touched base on. He wasn't able to attend today. So what we're going to do is just drop that one down to the bottom of the agenda. And if we have some time after your questions, we'll take a run at that. Otherwise, we'll just move it forward to the next agenda so we can adjust what that was like at our next meeting. So Hillary, if you can touch base real quick on the Mccall Housing Authority expiration, just as an example of what we're talking about when we start talking about these potential 3 housing management structures that are going to be part of that poll we're going to be sending out after our educational meetings.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. So one of the communities that I reached out to was Mccall. I spoke to the Community and Economic Development Director, Michelle Groneveld, just to find out what Mccall's doing. So they have a few things already in place. They have a housing incentive program. They recently released a request for qualifications to do a local housing action plan. And then they've had discussions with their city council recently to decide if they want to pursue a housing authority. So she brought forward a lot of information, kind of pros and cons of housing authorities and looking at different examples of housing authorities in the state, including the one in Blaine County, where it's not set up in the way that you would have kind of the HUD model where you're doing kind of the Section 8 and some of the other lower income housing. They're doing their own deed restricted properties that they manage, and that's how they're able to draw some income for kind of administration purposes. So they looked at those different models and thought that the housing authority really would offer Mccall the most flexibility for their community on how to kind of create more affordable and workforce housing in their community. They're calling it local housing, kind of like we're calling ours local worker housing. And so that was something that they voted on. The council is going to have them pursue it. It's going to be city specific, but it has the option to expand in the future to become more regional, because there's some benefits with a housing authority that they discovered that it's, it's a little bit more flexible in terms of jurisdictional boundaries. And so if during kind of the Q&A thing at the end, we can talk a little bit more about kind of the pros and cons, but the housing authorities, it does follow state statute. So it has that, and then the ability to do bonding for financing. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Well, we'll circle back to that at the end then. And then I'd like to welcome Brian Dale, who is the HUD State Director for Idaho. Thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it. As we talked in our working group, many of us who, I wouldn't put myself in that group, but a lot of the folks involved in this don't really understand the relationship with HUD and how it operates. And so we really appreciate you coming here today and just giving this entire group in our community an overview about that.
Sure. Hey, thanks so much for having me. I guess I would respond to that confusion. Part of it is because HUD has so many funding streams that come so many different directions towards the community. For example, as you know, the city has CDBG money from HUD, which is Community Development Block Grant directly from HUD. But then that area is covered for home dollars, which is the home partnership funding through Idaho Housing as a partner. So that can get a little confusing. So let me just sort of speak. I was asked to speak both to HUD's relationship with Idaho Housing and specifically to housing authorities and to home dollars. So let me cover those two things quickly. Currently, as I said, the home dollars come through IHFA. The FY 2020, if I got my numbers right, about $5.2 million came from HUD through IHFA, and they run a competitive process for that funding. Every year, from my understanding, they have more applications than they have money to distribute. So there is real competition to it, but that money can be used to do a number of things with developing housing locally. But it is a challenge, and probably if you choose to go that route, you're going to want to bring in some partners who have some experience dealing with that and can help move that forward. I was also asked on the housing authority relationship. Currently in Coeur d'Alene, and actually in all of the area up in that part of Idaho, IHFA is also the delivery agency for public housing money. And specifically, you're dealing with Section 8 housing choice vouchers in that area. And there are people, voucher holders, literally scattered all over. A person takes that voucher, goes to a property owner or manager who will accept a Section 8 voucher. That relationship, whether they're going to accept it or not, goes to Idaho Housing in terms of making sure that inspections are done. IHFA has their own rules that they follow, and that's how the Section 8 vouchers operate in that area. Now, let me just speak just a couple of steps further afield. So Hillary just mentioned that the Mccall Housing Authority, and that there is a state statute related to housing authorities. Don't forget too that USDA Rural Development also is involved with their own version of housing authorities. So some people get confused by that. You have, essentially 3 different kind of housing authorities in Idaho. You have the ones associated with HUD, you have the ones associated with USDA Rural Development, and as Hillary pointed out, you have the ones that have that sort of independent status as defined by the state. So that's sort of another big thing. I think one of the things that people could get confused about as well is what's called HUD multifamily housing. I can point to 2 very good examples. I know Larry from St. Vincent de Paul knows these. Larry Riley from St. Vincent de Paul knows these very well. Lynn Peterson and I'm gonna blank on the name of the other one. My apologies. Kathy Reed House are 2 different forms of what is currently multifamily. It was a competitive grant to do that, but one is a HUD 202 and the other is a HUD 811. And again, what does those mean? 811 is connected to housing people with disabilities. 202 is connected to housing seniors. They're so competitive that those grants don't even come out any given year. But again, if you're going to go after something like that, you definitely want to have a partner that has some experience dealing with that. So I know a lot of people kind of think public housing, and it gets kind of big, but in your area, if it's a static piece of property that HUD has an association with, that's a multifamily property. If it's an individual on a voucher, that's through public housing and through Idaho Housing Finance Association. I hope I've been able to help address the confusion that appears out there with this a little bit. And, I'll stick with you over time as people sort this out in their mind, because often it doesn't stick the first time. It takes a little practice to learn it. Kiki, I think that's it.
Great, Brian, thank you. And I think that it is going to take some time. And I think one of the things that it illustrates is that this group has been talking about is we do have organizations that you mentioned that deal with this level and piece of income for housing here, and that we do have some other flexibility in housing authorities that's different from those. So that's part of our educational piece, and we want to keep that moving forward and in the discussion. So hang in here with us. We might have some questions here at the end, and I appreciate you jumping in if you can.
Yeah, Kiki, one more quick thing. That Shoto designation that you mentioned, that's yet another part of HUD. So there you go.
You're everywhere.
All right, we are. Thank you.
Okay, and so next up, Len, if you're available, there were a couple. He's a Post Falls Chamber Advisory Committee member, and he was going to talk a little bit about the Idaho Housing Trust Fund and kind of give everybody an overview. We've got a lot of new folks here who may have not even heard about what that is. So if you could just give us an overview, and let's start getting information out about that.
Okay, yes. In 1992, the state of Idaho passed legislation, actually Title 67, Chapter 81, establishing the Idaho Housing Trust Fund. It was centered with what was the predecessor of IHFA at the time. The legislation provided for the governor to appoint a 7-member commission, including community representatives, real estate professionals, members of the Department of Commerce, and members of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Unfortunately, there was no funding the legislation continues to be on the books. There was no funding. At recent testimony in 2006 by the director of the IHFA indicated that simply using the interest accruing on real estate brokers trust funds would create a funding source of $150,000. But there are 46 other states, including Arizona, Washington, Utah, Oregon, and Montana, who've created similar trust funds. And they have a continuous source of funding, which is either part of a transfer fee, which is paid by the seller, 1/4 to 1/2 of 1%, or part of the actually title transfer fee, which is charged by the title company. And those funds are then funneled into the trust fund. The commission appointed by the governor would basically establish, receive applications from communities to tap into the trust fund. There's also some federal funds that would be matching. Again, there was a legislation introduced by Wendy Jacken of the representative from Ketchum in 2006 to allow real estate localities or counties to also utilize this kind of funding mechanism, creating a local trust fund, either by using real estate transfer fees or impact fees. This was significantly opposed by the real estate community, and that failed. But there's a number of things that the trust fund can be used for assistance, including not limited to new construction, rehabilitation, acquisition of housing units to be occupied by low and very low income housing households, rent subsidies for new construction, matching funds for social services, technical assistance for design and finance services, administrative costs for CHODOs, shelters, mortgage subsidies, mortgage insurance, payment of permit and impact fees for developers who want to develop low-income housing. Just a number of very innovative for 1992, certainly, opportunities that were set forth in the current legislation that's still on the books. We just need a funding mechanism.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. Two things on that. I think we talked about this the last time we mentioned it, in that we all felt that the real estate community is the group that was going to have to get behind the conversation, because we couldn't do something with a housing trust locally. It would have to be a statewide funding effort, and that they would have to see the value and buy-in if that, and move it forward themselves. And then the other thing is that I don't know if this ever got answered, and maybe you know, maybe you don't, but were the items that could be used out of the trust fund specific to the area median income levels?
Yeah, the legislation refers to low and very low, but that would be the same criteria established by HUD that IHFA uses and other organizations use. I would think that with the current escalation in housing prices and the reality that we're pricing our service industry folks out of the market, there might be some buy-in by the real estate community. I know they were represented by Freeman Duncan at the time the legislation was introduced in '92, and they supported the legislation.
Okay, good to know. Well, that's one that we certainly want to make sure anyone who's listening and is in that industry knows it's not something we are saying. This is it's educational. We're here for education and to move this forward, have people have an opportunity to ask questions and see if these are tools that they want us to further explore. So Len, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and information about that with us, and I'm sure we're gonna have you back.
Okay.
Then if we can move on to David Callahan, who was gonna, he's a Kootenai County Development Community Development Director, and he's going to talk with us about some things going on that he is aware of in Boulder County. Unless he left. I think David's here. I see him.
David.
It looks
is
like he's on
here.
the
There we go. I
phone.
think he's muted.
I think
He's on the phone.
Oh, he is? Okay. All right.
Okay, thanks. So far, Sean, thank you for sending out those links. If you folks didn't see that, Sean put the links in the chat box to those Coeur d'Alene Press articles that we were talking about that can get you up to speed on that, on the open space, and as well another one on the schools that ran in the press. And I really appreciate their coverage of those. So he did that. Hillary, do you have any information on the LEAP Charities program?
I can certainly read what Al had provided. I don't have it memorized, but I'd be happy to do so. So
Great, do that, and
Alan
we'll-
Wolf had reached out to them just to kind of find out what they do. And this is the Chodo example Kiki was talking about. They were started in 2016 by a Boise area realtor who saw a need for affordable housing in the Treasure Valley. They have several services they provide under the nonprofit umbrella. And this is similar to the example that Bob talked about. So it's a shared equity program. And they have a housing trust. So they own the land and they build the houses for people in income levels below 80% area median income. And so the homeowners are able to get a greatly reduced housing cost, but also share in the equity when they sell the home. The housing trust was created with a capital campaign that raised $2.1 million from various foundations, businesses, and individuals. And then St. Alphonsus Health System and Blue Cross each gave $250,000 to get things rolling. They currently have a duplex in Nampa that is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 960 square foot, and a community of 14 homes that's called Charities Commons. And then they also have a community of 8 homes called Windy Court. Some of the units are specified for elderly or disabled residents. And they gave an example of one of the homes in the Charities Court sold for $212,000. So definitely a lot more affordable than the prices we are seeing in our market currently. They also offer home buying counseling, which is great. So they provide services for people who are challenged in the process of buying a home, and they help walk people through that entire process. They also have some refugee homes. They own 3 condos in Boise to help refugees with the resettlement process, and those residents can stay in the furnished units for up to 30 days while they find more permanent housing. It is also an affiliate of ROC USA, which is Residents Owned Community. This is a situation where mobile homeowners come together to purchase their land that the park is sitting on, and then they can form a board who oversees maintenance and regulates the increase in the lot rentals. So that's what we have from Al. So yeah.
That was great. There's,
Interesting program.
and I think there's been a couple of other programs like that throughout the Northwest that have come to light, and we'll continue to research some of those that kind of wrap services around individuals so they can become more financially successful in home ownership. And there's some good examples and programs to follow. Looks like David might be able to be back with us. And if we moved forward, David, but if you're ready and you want to share some of the Boulder County information, go ahead and unmute yourself. And
I'm sorry, Commissioner Filios called. That's the one person that can get my attention under any circumstances.
well done.
So what was I going to
We were
respond
going
to?
to talk about Boulder County, and I don't know all of the details, but it was a Boulder County, some housing issues there that you had examples that you did some research on.
Oh, actually, I tried to call them twice. They didn't respond. And I asked my contact, who's the director at their land use department, if he could get me a phone number. He didn't respond. So I have Zip for Boulder County.
Okay.
All I
David,
can
what
tell
was
you-
the other one that you contacted though? Was there one in the Boise area that you said had offered assistance
was.
to us? What was that
Those
one?
guys were fabulous. They actually have done lots of housing, and most of it actually is cottage style, like pocket neighborhoods. You're familiar with the term, where you have groups of housing around an open area with, in some cases, a little gathering place. like a community center. And they've got 12 of those in the Boise area. So that was impressive.
And what was that group's name again, David?
I don't have it at my.
Remember, I was trying to find your email as well.
I'm sorry, I've been pulled in too many directions.
No problem.
I didn't come prepared to talk about it.
But they did offer that they could provide assistance to us, right? If, yeah, Neighborhood Works. Here we go. Here was a,
Neighbor,
what it was called.
yes,
Yeah.
there
yeah.
it is. Yeah,
Thank
the
you,
mayor
Corey.
was really helpful. Said if we have any questions, feel free to circle back around.
Do you or Corey know if that required code amendments in the city in order to have that type of neighborhood developed?
My memory is you said no. I think they already had the zoning in place that allowed for it.
Okay, well, maybe that's one we can move into the toolkit as far as a little more explanation during the working group on what the details of that one were, and we can bring that forward to the advisory group for discussion on our next one. Brian had a comment, had his hand up. Did you want to jump in on that one, Brian?
Yeah, Kiki, I just wanted to add that not only do you have NeighborWorks in Boise, but there's a great NeighborWorks organization in Pocatello operating in a slightly smaller community that might be good for some comparison to some of the areas where you are. And their director is really, really innovative in doing some great things. So that might add to what you're trying to get at there.
Good. Well, we will put that on the to-do list. So, David, did you have anything else?
I did talk with the staff at Senators Crapo, Rich, and Representative Fulcher, and they were all very receptive. Apparently, it worked on the national level. APA reached out to everyone all across the nation in the same way I did with our locals. And the Housing Supply Affordability Act is currently still in the reconciliation package before Congress. It's looking like it's going to go through. And that would give us some more zoning tools to reform local zoning so that if any of our cities, for instance, want to do what's going on nationally and what you just talked about in the Boise area, where they basically opened up zoning like it was in our grandparents' generation for single family areas to include duplexes, townhomes, cottage style development, pocket neighborhoods, and even multifamily, all in what used to be a single family district. So that's a national movement. This Affordability Act, if it goes through, will actually help facilitate that. There will be grants, and HUD will have a specific go-to place for planners to reach out to get prototypes. I'm pretty jazzed. This could be one of the seminal efforts of our era. It reminds me of the 701 money of the 50s, which most of you are too young to know, but that was money that was possible for small and rural areas to do their first comprehensive plans.
Great. Well, good. More good info on that. So at this time, we've got like 15 minutes left. If there was any of the other panelists who had information, again, reviewing, we're on an educational process here. We want for all of the advisory group members to have as much information as possible, be able to come back to these videos and review what each of our panelists was talking about, share them with their networks before sending the information out for a survey, so we get a good educated response when we get that poll back as to which, if any, of these three potential housing management structures the community wants this working group to pursue to bring back. So that's what we're about at this point. Is there anyone that had anything else to add or any questions of the panelists they wanted to bring up? We'll spend a few minutes here on that. What we want to do, as I say that, in your packet, there was pros and cons as to this survey that we're talking about. So I hope that you have read that, taken a look at the pros and cons to each of these management structures that we've been we're going to be asking you to weigh in on. And then do you have any questions that we can answer for you right now about those pros and cons and information we've shared with you today? So if so, raise your hand or put it in the chat box and Sean will call on you. So I'm not sure if that was a question. How do you think putting high density multifamily into single family, how do you think people respond to that? I don't know. So that's what we're going to do, is send it out to the communities. It's some solutions have to come up with how our community is going to move forward. That's what our job is to provide these resources and see what we can do. And the answer is I don't know. Did anyone else have a question? Okay. All right. Well, I will say that our next working group meeting then, as far as I've gotten out of our notes today, is we've got a few more items we're going to explore regarding building the toolkit. So hopefully we can move a few of those things forward. I guess we're going to take a look at some of the neighbor works projects and maybe some of the other, the LEAP ideas that came into I think we're calling it the more flexible housing authority, if that is defined by state, but it doesn't deal with specifically just low income. It can be created more flexible. So I think I'm hearing we should bring forward on our working group the expansion to explain to the advisory group members what that would look like in a different light than just dealing with that very low described HUD level low income. And then adding that we want to do additional education on these 3 housing management structures between now and the working group meeting. We'll flesh those out at the working group, and then we'll come back to the advisory group, hopefully with another session like this that we can educate you further on what we found based on today's discussion and get ready to send that survey out. Is there any other question? Go ahead.
One question I had that might be helpful, because it would help me understand, I think probably the attendees as well. If Brian, Dale, if you could clarify too, so in the communities that might have a housing authority like Blaine County, for example, where the housing authority is not administering the Section 8 vouchers, how does that work? Would IHFA still be the entity to do that, or how would the two kind of work together?
Great.
Well, historically, there are HUD connected housing authorities that do that traditional model of actually building a building and then renting it to people as they come and go to the housing authority. A good example of that is probably the Nampa Housing Authority. Interestingly, for an example of a USDA Rural Development Housing Authority, the Caldwell Housing Authority, and that particular property had originally been farm worker housing, but now it's more broadly recognized housing authority. You know, I should say that the Nampa Housing Authority has gone with what's called RAD, which is sort of gives them a little bit more local control over how they use and take care of their properties. But those housing authorities had the sort of the designation of the original traditional buildings that they would rent. Twin Falls shares a housing authority like that with Jerome as well. That's another good example of a HUD connected housing authority. Am I getting at your question here? Because I want to make sure I'm not veering off from what you were asking.
I guess I was just wondering how the two, so if I don't know what the survey responses will be. If our advisory committee will say, just keep focusing on the CHODOs or the CBDOs, or if they want us to look at an alliance. But if they said they want us to look at the housing authority, but if the sentiment was to kind of do a housing authority that was more like Blaine County, where it wasn't necessarily getting into the Section 8, who would still do that? Would that be IHFA in our region?
You know, I'm honestly, when Blaine County set themselves up, I don't remember what the levers that they needed to pull were. But I think that talking to somebody at Idaho Housing would be a wise choice to make sure that any role that they have in that process, that they can assist you with that. But HUD really didn't have a role in Blaine County designating themselves to do that. But now people in Blaine County are working on home funded properties and doing other things with tax credit and some other things. They're encountering challenges of a high income area, trying to house people that are in other places may be considered middle income, but in Blaine County, they're low income. So it's, as you know, that can bring its own challenges. So.
Absolutely.
Everybody, it looked like we had a question from Ed DePriest. It says, what is the money range or dollar range of HUD vouchers? Thank you.
That is determined each year. Our Office of Public and Indian Housing does surveys that determine what those amounts can be. As you know, when somebody uses a voucher, they pay 30% of their income to the housing that they rent, and then HUD subsidizes the rest up to what the market would indicate it needs to be. So each county around you there has a different amount. It's not specific for the entire state of Idaho. It's going to be different in each county. And does that get to your question?
Question, I've got a kind of follow-up question on that is, does HUD have a limit though on the, you know, say a 2-bedroom, 1-bath place being rented in Kootenai County? You know, is there a limit saying, you know, that it cannot exceed, you know, $1,100?
If a HUD voucher is involved, yes.
Yeah.
If they're just renting on the open market, no.
Right, but if you got a voucher, right? But if you have a voucher and you're going to a landlord and saying, "Hey, I'd like to use my voucher," there is a limit on that voucher.
Right. And again, but not only is there a limit on the financial part of that, but that property would need to be approved by IHFA's public housing staff.
Right. Yeah.
In order to be qualified to be part of that.
Yes, but is there a document that indicates what those numbers are for Kootenai County?
Yeah, each year those are released.
And where are those found?
I don't have it right in front of me here, but we can go and get that. I saw there were a couple of IHFA people on here. I don't know if they want to speak up to that particular piece, but that's a moving target. Every year it changes.
Mm-hmm.
Jack or Corey, do you want us to allow you to speak? You want to raise your hand?
All right. Well, Bob will go pursue that.
Yeah.
We'll get that
Yeah.
information back and we'll put it, by the time we get to working group, we'll put it in some meeting notes and make sure that we have some resources for that. That seems like it might be a frequently asked question that if it's there, maybe that we could put under there during the working group. We have a list of frequently asked questions on the CAMPIA website. Sounds like the answer to this one might be good to just keep regularly posted there. So I'll put that down on our working group to-do list.
And just as kind of like a follow, I mean, Ed's got his follow-up on there.
I saw that.
Yeah, and I don't think that's accurate, but you know, you can.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more complicated than just a simple number game like that. But
Right. Yeah.
there are other factors that play into that a little bit. So it's not a straight 1,500, so 500 and 1,000. It's going to be a little nuanced. So sorry about that.
Great, and it looks like a couple of other people, or Larry weighed in from St. Vinny's in the chat box, and he said when there's a gap, there's a process to increase voucher using other rental rates in the market. So perhaps we can get a few of you together and really work on that FAQ. Maggie probably has information on that, deals with it all the time. Would that, if that's amenable to everyone, maybe we'll invite a few of you who have the the exact answers to that question to the working group meeting, and we can flesh that out and post that back out on the FAQs, unless it's one that is so fluid it would never able to be asked. But it seems like there would be some facts we can put under there. Does that work for everyone? Cool.
That's great.
One of the last things I wanted to touch on is one of the things that I know that we have been discussing since the beginning is that this group really wants to be able to facilitate what can happen in the private market. And I think even Jeff talking about dealing with developers and how they can be engaged in this, us talking with contacting our realtors, how they can be engaged in that. The conversation to be developed on that housing alliance idea is new. It's not one that I think we found an exact model in the rest of the state. But I wanted to tell you all that it's one that we have not dropped as far as an option, whereby we would have a center hub organization, and then we would have partners at the table, funders and the toolkit and the planners and the jurisdictions. And what we would be able to do under some sort of stable program is be able to take housing situations on a case-by-case basis and address who's the best entities, organizations to deal with how that might come forward, or what policy might need to come forward with that. So we do have still some more questions on that, in that, you know, how do we create a framework that creates a stable organization with that kind of an alliance, or is that alliance something that we can work into one of these independent housing authority umbrellas? So I think that's where we're at with that one, and that one's definitely rising to the top of the working group to-do list too. So we've got just a couple minutes left. Is there anybody who wanted to add anything? Shoot us a question. As always, I get them all the time. Email me later on progress or ideas or questions, because I can bring it up when we have our working group meeting in 2 weeks. But is there anything else for today?
Kiki, this is Nagy. I would just add this observation, because so much has been discussed today, that there are really two distinct buckets, right, of assistance for the worker housing. We've talked a lot about HUD and IHFA finance, which is typically 80% and less of area median income. So what you just talked about, the solutions for our above 80% to probably 120, 130% AMI, are solutions that we really need to figure out as well as the community, because there are restrictions and a lot of compliance that comes with the federal money. And it's very helpful, right, for our extremely low. But this group, what I love about this group is that it's looking at a whole span. And that's what we're doing with the U of I study, is looking at a wide range of incomes so that we can have a rudder for the ship for these different groups and the different solutions needed.
Thank you, Maggie. And
Yeah.
I do think that that's where, when Maggie's speaking about that higher AMI, that's a lot of our local worker housing conversation. It's not providing what our organizations in the area already do provide for our lower income, but it's moving into conversations that are going to deal with people who need to live in the town where they work, but they can't afford to do that even at a substantial wage and a good position and 2 people working, that we've kind of jumped out of that range of homes for people who need to live where they work. So that's going to take the private sector working with us, and we want to make sure that that's a huge focus, and that this group understands that that is what the working group has not dropped out of sight, out of mind. Today's educational moments were brought with a lot of that other HUD money and those conversations for clarity, but we are going to move into the partnerships that can exist with public, private, and the win-wins for developers and our local worker housing. So that will be top of agenda for the working group. Is there anything else I can add before I let you all go? Otherwise, our next meetings are going to be November 22nd at 3 p.m. for the advisory group. And our working group possibly may get together more than once between now and then to cover some of the major educational pieces that we have. Again, if you wanted some presentations or you have questions, feel free to email me. I truly appreciate all of you being here. And for our guest panelists, thank you for being here today. And our subcommittees, thanks for your work there. That's all I have. And if you got a question, let me know. Otherwise, have a great rest of your evening.